day to you all. I am Afika Jadezweni.
And I'm Nick Andersen, and you tuned into today's episode of REFOCUS.
I must say you're looking pretty dapper today, Nick.
You know, I try, Afika, hey? And those shoes, though, every episode you just manage to outdo yourself even more.
You know me, though.
Must be nice. In our last episode, we ran a competition where we asked you to hashtag vagina on Twitter and tell us your personal vagina story. Later in the show, P will surprise us the winner at a local coffee shop.
But before we get into that, under today's theme, addressing the rhino in the room, we tackle issues of masculinity, unrealistic beauty standards, and even the oh-so-taboo vagina.
Being in a new environment, school, job, or even city, comes with new experiences that can make us rethink some of our perspectives on life. This may be on deeply personal and sometimes controversial issues, things we aren't always that keen to talk about because they can be a bit uncomfortable to discuss. And that's why today we're addressing the rhino in the room. Just a note, this does contain visuals that might offend sensitive viewers.
Following the brutal dehorning last week on 3 white rhinos at Kariga Game Reserve.
With 117 rhinos poached this year alone, South Africa is facing a wildlife crisis.
Khakama Game Park in Port Elizabeth has opted to dehorn all its rhino.
This is a site that may disappear in the years to come. Because the way we're carrying on, they're going to no longer be around.
I think human rights do need to be focused on just because there are so many issues. But I think that animal rights cannot be sort of ignored in doing that, and that they actually offer up a massive field of ways to actually help humans.
There is a lot we still need to work on human rights as such, to such an extent that it would obviously be a shame to prioritize human rights for the sake of animals. But in my perspective at this moment, I feel like we still need to work on the case of the essence or the elements of human protection and maybe human rights, and we can move on to really focusing a lot more on animals in my perspective.
As a pharmacy student, hoping to one day be a healthcare professional, I believe that human rights should be prioritized because we have a lot of people in the world, and we also there's a lot of suffering happening with people. But as a person who is very in love with animals, I also do feel that it's not necessarily definitely a prioritization of a person over an animal, because both are important.
The fate of the rhino is very much a class and racial thing in that sense, because that is what these people know. These are the experiences they have. You know, they don't have the experience of somebody going to bed without food. You see on pension day, you see the queues. There is not a single white person in those queues. They are all black people, black women who have got children and got, you know what I mean. It's that is the real tragedy actually. So now the experience of white South Africans is the rhino.
I went to an all-girls school which was very involved in environmental awareness and very involved in activism projects. This one assembly, we were called in to the hall and they told us that they had a video for us to watch. It was an SPCA assembly. They called us in and we watched a video of a rhino basically being killed. It was very vivid. It was very scary for a lot of people. I remember seeing blood, seeing the horn, and just thinking how evil people were. And after that, our school became very passionate about the Saving the Rhino campaign. Then I came to Rhodes. And I started analyzing and criticizing everything that I took in from high school. All issues starting from hate issues, you know what's going on now, hate issues, I started questioning that. I started questioning why I stood for certain things where teachers would say things to me and I automatically assumed that because the teacher said this, it was the right thing. You know, I didn't question things. And I started to just basically critically analyze everything. I remember asking myself, what does the rhino mean to me as a black middle-class woman in South Africa today? I started looking at who promotes the Save the Rhinos campaigns. It's mostly white people, if I'm being honest. But then I kind of took a seat back over time and I sat and I thought about it again. And I think that it's not fair that as a black person, I'm not saying that I am forced, but I kind of feel obliged to pick a struggle. I kind of feel obliged to pick whether do I support the cause of the rhino or do I support the cause of my black sister who is not getting the education that they deserve. I kind of thought back to the fact that yes, this may be an animal, and to some people, the quality of life of an animal is not as amazing as a human to some people. But then again, to me, it's just as important. I'm a Christian woman, and I do know that in the Bible it says that God put animals on this earth so that we can take care of them. And what does it mean to me now that I am fine with this animal being killed? I'm fine with this animal, with its horn being sold to other people, you know, with it just being ripped away from its skin, from its flesh. How is it that I am fine with that, even though there are other struggles? And I thought to myself, what can we do to fight these two different struggles at the same time? I am Shimela Gangi. I am a third-year journalism and politics student at Rhodes University, and this is my rhino. What is yours?
To talk more about the issues we've just seen, we have in studio with me Asiya Nazo and Lelo Macheke. Thank you so much for joining us, guys. Appreciate your time. All right, so we've seen the whole contrast in that first package about the rhino and human rights. Do those two issues go hand in hand? Are they mutually inclusive? What are you guys' thoughts on that?
Okay. I think they do go hand in hand to some extent. And I think it's very dangerous to say they're similar to like a very large degree. But I do see a trend where you have, you know, two beings that exist, that breathe, that eat, that are oppressed. But I think we have to hold, you know, people to a higher status because we're people. And it's not right, but I think it's just the order of life that, you know, human life to me is more valuable than animal life. Doesn't mean that I shouldn't protect the animal life, but that's my main focus, the human life. So, yeah.
Lelo?
I agree with her to some extent. So we live, you know, intersectional lives with animals, we coexist with animals, and we mostly get our resources and our ways of living through animals. I think it is possible to deal with the issue of human rights and the issue of animal rights without the two treading or negatively impacting one another. I think when we begin to speak about prioritization of whichever issue, then that becomes the problem, because then we begin to neglect the actual root causes of our issues.
And addressing the rhino in the room is about looking at the norms and conventional values and questioning that. So what would you guys both say has been your rhino since you've come to university? Let me start this off.
Ooh, what has been my rhino? My rhino has been, you know, issues of identity. It has been issues of, you know, how different people are stratified within society. It's been about power. So to sort of, you know, ignore, complicate the metaphor, it has been far from anything to do with animals, actually.
I would say mine has also been similar to Lelo's with identification and finding my own identity within the space. And now that I found it, it's hard because now I'm a black Muslim in the space, and then I have to find myself as a black Muslim amongst other Muslim and amongst like everyone else. So that's been the issue for me.
You guys both touched on there that you struggle to find your identity or dealing with that once you come to university. Why do you think it took so long in a place like this? It may have taken long, it might not have been as long as you thought. But what do you think was holding it back or holding yourselves back from just figuring that out?
You know, it's easy to blame the environment, but I think it was myself. I think it doesn't matter where I would have been in the world. It's just a process that I would have to take to find myself. Sometimes you need to be lost. You need to, you know, just kind of dabble around. And I would say it was myself and just not knowing who I was at the time. And obviously the environment itself is not really, it's not really an environment of depth. I don't know if maybe that's just my opinion, but it's hard to find yourself in a place like this.
Okay. Before we move forward, let's take a look at Rhodes University student Sibusiso as we look at his own personal rhino story.
I've always been the way I am today. I don't remember myself being any different from the person I am today. Even when I was very young, I was always different from the other boys I was raised with, and I suppose at that time people noticed this difference. And although I didn't realize at the time that I was different, I got to learn that I actually was different when I got to school, and not with my family. Really, my family's always been very accepting of who I am, and I don't remember for a day them questioning me about why I do what I do, or why I do certain things in a certain way. And so when I got to school, and I started growing in primary school, I started realizing that, okay, so I don't act like the other boys do in my class, and I always question myself why. And and my classmates, they realized this, and that caused for a lot of bullying, and then a lot of name calling, and I didn't understand why in the beginning, because I thought that I was just doing I was just doing what seemed natural to me. I was being who I am. Why are these people now sort of attacking me for being who I am? So that was me basically through my entire primary school career, just trying to figure out why my difference is a cause for so much hatred. When I got to grade 7, and then I found out that I was going to go to an all-boys high school, I was really concerned about as to how I would adapt to that environment, because I was at a co-ed school, and a lot of my friends were girls, and I always knew that I got along better with girls than I did with boys. And so I thought to myself, how will I relate to the people that I'll see in high school? And so there were all these questions in my mind, and people would always question me, like, how would you survive in an all-boys school, very religious school as well? So the kind of person you are really won't be appreciated there. I was discouraged a lot from participating in sports, doing well. I was never encouraged to do things that would make me sort of rise to the top in a particular area. I used to do athletics in primary school, and in high school, when I got into the athletics team, I remember one of the teachers said that, listen, we can't have you going out to represent our school in our uniform, being the person you are. That is not what we want to portray to the public.
We've seen Sibusiso's story there and his own struggles, and earlier you mentioned depth. Lelo, is there anything you'd like to touch on with that, on how the depth of the environment, maybe how your guys' stories connected or anyway?
I agree with Asiya. I think when we speak about the depth of an environment, we put society in a metaphor. So we are seeds, and the society in itself, or the environment, is the soil. And what happens in this society, Rhodes University, is that there is a dominant hegemony, or a group of people, or a dominant culture that is able to accept pretty much anybody who's willing to assimilate into it, but it in itself is not ready to transform and become more accommodative, so that people can live more meaningfully amongst one another. So that is the depth that we're talking about, that inclusivity, to really come to a space and to develop as people, and to feel safe in that process of development, so that when we graduate with that degree at the end of the 4 to 5 years, we can really come out and say, this was a space where I could grow.
And then Lelo, sticking with you here, we saw in Sibusiso's story how he battled to as not conforming to the masculinity norms or whatever, and just showing that he's not, again, maybe again you mentioned the environment, what his environment made masculinity look like. Why do you think males that don't necessarily conform to that are such an easy target for bullying, or just have to deal with so much because they don't fit in that way?
Because hegemony equates to power. If you belong to a certain identity, and that identity is not only dominant in terms of population, but it is well represented among the people, it's well represented in the social culture. I mean, you won't necessarily find, effeminate men at Friars. So if you don't have spaces where people who are like that on this university exist, then that makes them an easy target for violence of all kinds. So that's why people like Sibusiso find it difficult or have violent experiences existing in such spaces, because there isn't that kind of representation.
And Asiya, you mentioned earlier converting from Christianity to Islam. What was that like, and how were some of the issues that may have had to deal with since that, if any at all?
A term that I prefer using is reverting, because that more implies going back to how you originally were. And I think that I was born Muslim, I was born believing in God. And how that was for me was, it didn't feel like anything new. Just like the term reverting means going back, I felt like I was going back to how I was originally supposed to be, or like what I was originally supposed to believe in, because even from like a very young age, I've always questioned, things I learned from Bible school, things I don't want to delve into because I don't want to insult anyone else's belief. But from church, I was never able to get those answers from those questions. It was always, lead by faith, we lead by faith, not by sight. And through Islam, I was able to find answers to those questions. And when I did, I was satisfied. And for me, religion is a gamble, and you need to find the one that you're willing to place your bet on. And Islam was that for me.
And then since reverting, how has people's perceptions of you changed? Are they still the same? Do they look at you the same way? Or have you noticed any suspicious things like that?
No, it's not the same. It's not the same. I mean, you can imagine what a big change it was, because it's not something that I gave anyone warning of. It's not something I spoke about. It's something that I just went and did. And I'm that kind of person. I don't talk about a major change and I'm about to make it. I just make it. And, it's either the people around me are going to accept it and go with the flow, or they're just going to be kicked out. And that's what happened. I lost friends. Some people stopped talking to me. Some people's relationships with me are a bit awkward now, and they haven't found their place with me in my new life. It's not even that new, but they haven't, found a space in my change. And it's been, definitely. Like, there has been a lot of like new treatments. So I mean, oh gosh, like it's quite an emotional journey, to be honest with you. And some of the change is not good. And people's treatment of me was one of that change that hasn't always necessarily been good.
And Lelo, is there any major change or something similar in your life when you made a transformation or went back to something that you can relate to from hearing that story about people's perceptions of you changing?
I think the whole changing in perception, it comes with the growth. When you come to university, you're not necessarily who you are, pre-university, or just in any space. You might be at university, you might be some person at university, but you might be someone else at home. But I think the major change for me is when you yourself don't, it's something that I've discovered, Lelo, you don't treat yourself like a student, because I'm either filming something or I'm writing something, or, I'm just trying to put something together just to have for myself. And people feel as though I disconnect myself, or I become inaccessible just because I'm independently trying to set up something for my own life besides the degree. And I think university is a healthy space. It's a great space to really to exercise your entrepreneurial muscle. And I've discovered that people don't enjoy that, but I guess that's just the nature of not only a university space, but just in the world, really.
And Asiya, we've seen just how we know how society has such a implication and such a powerful connection with how beauty standards are shaped. We looked at it a bit earlier in the show. Now, we know religions in some regards do that also. So has there ever been, how has it, this change just with society might not have affected you at all, but how has this change affected your perceptions on beauty standards?
I wouldn't say it's changed my perception of beauty standards, because I've always kind of had my own standard, which didn't really quite fit into the norm of what people saw as beautiful to begin with. So I've always been into like dressing in like loose clothes, or covering up more. And at the time, most of the time when I did that was because I felt insecure about my body, because I didn't fit into the normal way that a girl should look. But now it's reverting has made me see the beauty in myself, regardless of what I'm wearing, regardless of my body and everything, and just the beauty that I have as a human being. So I think I've been able to transform that into the way I dress, and now see covering up as decorating myself as opposed to hiding myself.
And Lelo, to people outside of Rhodes, Rhodes is often, for those who don't know what's going on, it's often seen as an all-inclusive liberal institution. Would you agree with that? Or if so, maybe slightly agree or disagree? What are your thoughts on that?
That's a complicated and sort of multifaceted question. But to answer your question simply, Rhodes University is definitely not inclusive. I mean, if it was inclusive, then we wouldn't have legal action being taken against the women of color at this university trying to protect themselves from issues of sexual violence and things like that. So how are you can't talk about inclusivity if you are not willing to protect everybody that you have selected to come to this community and be a part of the Rhodes University citizenship. If you're not willing to protect those people, then you can't call your institution inclusive. If people feel as though they cannot enter certain spaces, if people are threatened in any kind of way, if there is violence of any kind from one group to another group, then you can't call yourself inclusive. So if that kind of violence is being exerted from the institution itself, then it doesn't have the right to call itself inclusive.
Asiya, just jumping on what Lelo said there, how do we go about fixing that? How do we go about, we've seen that inclusivity and trying to get towards it is a massive social issue around the world right now, not just in Grahamstown or South Africa. How do we here go about fixing that and making the inclusivity at Rhodes a real thing? Is there even a way?
I think the first step would be just admitting to your own ignorance as a person, admitting your own bias towards certain people. And because if you know that you have a problem and you don't know about these people but you have a perception of them, then that's when you can actually begin working on it. I think what we saw, or what I saw during the Fees Must Fall protest, during the RE reference list protest, was people have a lot of messed up thoughts. Like, people think a lot of messed up things and they don't see anything wrong with the way they think. And I think once you open yourself up to the possibility of being wrong, that's when we can work towards the right thinking and the right perception of people. And that's essential to inclusivity.
Asiya, Lelo, again, thank you so much for that wonderful insight. After the break, Afika tackles the various issues around masculinity. Stay tuned.
What is a man? Where do we draw the fine line between a man and a boy? Google, the biggest search engine in the world, defines masculinity as the possession of the qualities traditionally associated with men. But in 2016, the issues with society and masculinity go much deeper. Welcome back to Refocus. We will now take a look at a short documentary where people talk about their experiences of masculinity and how its pressures have affected their lives.
The article #NoHomo, Man Hugs, Bitch Niggas, etc. was written by Rhodes University journalism student Jason Olafir.
There are a lot of things around masculinity that makes it a quite complex subject. I don't think that there's one specific type of masculinity, and I don't think that society actually recognizes that there's a diversity of masculinities out here. Yeah. As I mentioned in my article, the ideal man is the strong man who does not show emotion, the one who's strong, the one who is the leader. It's physical attributes even, like you should not be like, for example, I look at myself as very small, man, like honestly. And obviously, like, society would in this case see a more buff, masculine man as more of a man than they would see me. When I grew up, I was very different, honestly, from other boys. And I was pressured to play sport, and I had no interest in sport whatsoever. So I went to trial for like an under-9 rugby thingy, and I didn't make it. My father was disappointed. And I felt like such a mess. I felt like I was not good enough. So in order for me I had to be tough. I had to be strong. I had to be like the other boys who were like fast runners, who were more men than I was, and that's my earliest memory, actually, that I was pressured to get into rugby, and when I didn't, I was seen as weak and I wasn't seen as the normal boy.
I think society's ideal male is a heterosexual, cis white male.
No, don't make this about me.
Although Sheldon is comfortable with his own identity, this is not the case for all in modern society.
One of my friends, someone that I thought was a good friend of mine, and he said, if I had a son and he was gay, I would beat him until he becomes a man. And it broke my heart because for me, that said to me that, you know, his perceptions of what a man is and his perceptions of what a homosexual man is were so different. I remember when I was a minor and I was speaking to people that drink alcohol, for example. My aunt was speaking to me about, because I was like, oh my word, what is that you're having? I feel like I think it was a cider. And she was explaining to me that no, that's for women. And that men drink beer. And for me, I didn't understand it because I was like, but what if I want a cider? In a way, gender is an act. You get told that men have to act this way, they have to be butch, they have to play rugby, and women have to do this, and they have to be ladylike, and they have to do all of these things. And as soon as you fall outside of that, I get shame.
We now have our guest in studio with us, Kelly Solomon, a Rhodes University anthropology lecturer who's also doing her master's in identity. Thank you for joining us, Kelly.
Hi.
Now, having watched that piece, what are your initial thoughts about masculinity and the piece?
So my initial thoughts on masculinity is that it's a contested category at the moment, if you think about the conversations happening both on campus and globally as well. And I think when I look at the piece, it really challenges ideas of masculinity because you have two people who have thought about the term masculinity and what it means and have actually decided that even they feel that they are stable in their masculinity, but it doesn't fit into the box that was created. So I think it's a very interesting package because it really shows the diversity of masculinity, which isn't really discussed because masculinity itself is discussed as a static sort of stereotype or a category, as many of the other social categories that we're used to.
Do you then think it's a realistic portrayal of the way society views masculinity?
I think what they speak about is realistic, as in the way that they understand how society perceives it. But I also think it's interesting because it shows two individuals who are aware of the ideas society has of masculinity and are aware that it's problematic. So it would have been interesting to see if there was someone who identified with the sort of Western stereotypical idea of masculinity and understood it as natural and a fact which many men do feel about masculinity. So that aspect would have been interesting to see as well. Someone who is comfortable with the term rather than two people who find it problematic as well.
So speaking of the word problematic there, do you think the piece as a whole actually highlights the fact that masculinity perpetuates this crisis of patriarchy we are in as a society?
I definitely agree with you that what they speak about shows how masculinity does contribute to a patriarchal society. But I think through the conversation and the ideas around what they're speaking about, it challenges the idea of a patriarchal society in many ways because it shows how there are two individuals who are quite reflective of what society expects of them and also realize that they don't fit into those kind of categories as well. So perpetuates and challenges at the same time, to answer your question.
So we see that the piece was aimed at challenging these ideas and norms of masculinity. So then how then do you think we could challenge these norms and how do we move on from these common perceptions of masculinity for people who aren't necessarily conventionally masculine?
I think, I'm going to use the word decolonization because I think we have been colonized to perceive masculinity in a particular way, especially in a Western kind of ideal of hegemonic masculinity. And I think the only way to move past that is to decolonize the mind. So literally deconstruct the idea up here in like your head and how, because a lot of the time these kinds of things are taken as natural and fact and accepted. So unless we unpack it, we won't be able to move forward. So the only way I can think of doing that is through having conversations, dialogues. For example, the Argue reference list brought up a lot of conversation. I know in my lectures I address ideas of sex and genders as well. So doing it in education, but I think it shouldn't just be on a tertiary level. If you think of life orientation in high school, the kinds of things, so they talk about sex itself, but they don't talk about identity and how we perceive the world and how that is sort of being constructed. So I think we should start at an earlier age in making people more aware of the boxes that have been created for them, that they sort of just agree to without even choosing to, because that's what society expects of them.
Kelly, as someone who is in a position of teaching, how do we then break down these stereotypes and norms of masculinity?
Okay, so if you think about masculinity, it's a social category that's been created by Western society, basically, which dates back to so many years in the past. And the only way to sort of rid ourselves of it is to deconstruct those ideas in our mind. So in my classes, I always talk about decolonization of the mind. So it means you literally have to unlearn all those kinds of ideas that you have taken in as fact, as natural, as how things are supposed to be, because society keeps perpetuating them as natural. So in order to move forward, we have to decolonize the mind. And the only way to do that is through educating. So having these kinds of conversations, discussions. I know in my course I deal quite a lot with how sex and gender are socially constructed ideas. But I think beyond tertiary level, we need to bring it down to high school level already. So we talk about, like in life orientation, they deal with sex, but they don't deal with ideas of masculinity and femininity and how we sort of construct ideas of how people are supposed to be. Because even schooling as an institution perpetuates ideas of masculinity and femininity through how they expect girls and boys to dress, the kinds of sports they're supposed to play, how they're supposed to behave. So we have to deconstruct those ideas in all different kinds of institutions so that it doesn't continuously perpetuate into adulthood and stuff like that.
And then you speak of educating from a high school level already. What happens then to people who have gone through high school with these ideas of femininity and masculinity and may think it's too late to now learn the other side?
I personally don't believe that you're ever too old to learn or unlearn, but the thing is you have to be willing to do it. And I mean, I'm sure you're aware, like the older generation, they're very stuck in their ways and they have taken in that this is normal, this is how they're supposed to be. So it's scary because those are the people who teach younger generations, and that's how ideas continuously perpetuate. But that's actually my struggle at the moment, is how do we force people to decolonize their mind and to be willing to engage with ideas that they have taken as natural and fact. So at this point, I don't have an answer for that, but I think the only thing we can do is continuously have kinds of discussions. And I mean, if you think of the younger generation, I'm going to use this word, they've become more woke. So sitting around the dinner table or in a family home, having these conversations with your parents. I know I do that with my parents and my grandparents. And just introducing them to ideas that they actually haven't thought about. But from then, you know, everyone has agency. It really has to be up to that person on whether or not they're willing to engage with these kinds of ideas and deconstruct them for themselves.
Thank you very much, Kelly, for those insights.
You're welcome.
Moving on now to the next topic of the show, beauty standards. We have seen the pressures men face, but of course women have their fair share of unrealistic and at times unfair standards imposed on them. Two people from our team created a short documentary that draws our attention to the issue of body shaming, where we see three women who have overcome their flaws and have started embracing them.
When you hear the words, your body is a forest, a certain image springs to your mind. Your forest might be an oasis of waterfalls and free-flowing streams. It might be densely vegetated with exotic flowers erupting from the earth. It could have just a few tall trees made beautifully with the intricacy of their patterned leaves. The forest in your mind's eye is yours to nourish and tend as you please.
Well, I'm very tall. I'm 1.8 meters tall. I'm very thin, I'm not skinny. And I love my clavicle, and I'm dark-skinned. And yeah, that's how I can describe my body. I have big boobs, small booty, and sharp facial structures, yeah.
My body is brown, a nice dark brown. It's nice and soft, pudgy in all the right places. I have a little young kaba, a young tummy that I like to play drums on, and I kind of love it to bits. It's short, but not too short. it's my body, man. It's just the right body for me. I mean, obviously I've had moments where I've questioned if I should have been taller, I should have been skinnier, should I have been lighter.
I've got back rolls, asymmetrical boobs, wide tummy, thunder thighs, and lovely legs.
Oh, you've got to have big boobs, but not too big. Big butt, but not too big. Obviously, European facial structures is sharp nose. Bone structure has to be on point. You have to be tall, but not too tall. And fair-skinned, light-skinned, yeah. I was made fun of because I was not thick, I was not big. I looked like someone. Once said, you look like someone who's sick. In grade 8, I had an incident where we had a presentation of this HIV, presentation, sex, and the aftermath. And then someone in class was like, oh, that looks like Sisip's. And I was like...
I was bullied from the age of 6 because I've always been a chubby child. My mom has always told me to lose weight, so I started dieting at around the age of 7, got my first exercise machine when I was like 8-ish. So I've never thought I was enough. So because of that, I've always felt like I would have to overcompensate by being really friendly to people, even if they don't treat me right. I'd blame myself if friendships ended because I would think it was because of me and because I'm fat.
I like being black. I like being, I don't know if I'm thick, but I like my body. I like my skin color. I like how I look naked in the mirror. I like how I look clothed. I like how I look in lingerie as well. I just love how I look. I think it could be arrogance, but I'm not sure yet. But I really, 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 really love myself at this point. It's really ridiculous, honestly.
Every time I embrace my clavicle, if anything, please, Lord, let me not lose my clavicle.
Ooh, my legs. I love my legs. I really can't wait for summer so I can start wearing shorts again. Even my thighs. I don't care for my thunder thighs.
I'm not everyone's type of beautiful, and that's okay. Because I am someone's beautiful.
Be proud of your flaws, for they are beautiful. Build bridges and carve a path so that visitors have access to the incredible creation that you are.
We now introduce our guest, Jane Viedge, who has worked in the broadcast industry for 15 years and is now somewhat familiar with the beauty standards imposed on women. Thank you for joining us, Jane.
Sure.
So, having seen that piece, how would you define beauty standards from your understanding?
I think, as in every industry, there are certain beauty standards, although I don't think that they're necessarily officially recognized. So having come from a business broadcasting background, I would say that the emphasis there is on looking professional. And you could ask then, what role does beauty play in helping women to look professional? Well, from a broadcaster's perspective, so if I was presenting or reading the news, I would have to have my hair straightened and my hair washed and, a lot of makeup put on. And, everybody needs to dress respectfully, and it's about making sure that you're not distracting the viewer. But at the same time, one could ask the question, is that not just participating in this oppression of women, which is to say, is makeup, for example, or hair, playing a role in oppressing women? So I think it was one of those very implicit things where, absolutely, women were pressured into looking a certain way to go onto camera. Journalists behind the scenes certainly didn't need to go to the same lengths to do that because they weren't in front of camera. And also one has to, in the business broadcasting industry, the majority of viewers were male. So what does that say about how women anchors perceived themselves?
And so you mentioned just a few of the things you have to, this criteria you have to fulfill to be in front of the camera as a woman. Do you think the standards are the same or as strict for black women compared to white women?
In my experience, it was quite different because at the beginning of my career, not that many black women had begun to develop their careers in business broadcasting per se. But yes, absolutely, the pressure was the same. The directive is always look professional, and you need to go to the hairdresser, you need to put your makeup on, etc., and whatever it takes to look good, as long as the hair's done, as long as the clothes are there, the makeup's on. Absolutely. For men, completely different story.
Speaking of makeup, Alicia Keys recently announced that she has stopped wearing makeup, and there's this whole debate around it that it's accepted that she's doing it because she's conventionally pretty, she's already light-skinned, and she's doing it now that she no longer has acne. What's your take on the whole no makeup versus makeup thing for people who are, media faces?
I'm absolutely comfortable with however people want to portray themselves. And I know that a lot of women in the media are very strong. I know a lot of strong women in the media who have very strong personalities, and they're very comfortable with who they are. So I think that really it depends on where you are in that, let's say, comfort continuum as to how much makeup you want to wear. I think what Alicia Keys has done is fantastic, really. And it's really interesting to see people's reactions to it, because I saw that some people thought that she shouldn't have pitched up to the award ceremony with no makeup, and others celebrated it. At the end of the day, how does she feel about it? And I think it's also very good that conversations are now being stimulated over social media platforms, because these are the kinds of questions that need to be raised. I also think that women need to ask the question, do I really need to wear a lot of makeup in order to have a successful board presentation, or to sit successfully in a meeting to nail a deal? And if the question is yes, then at least if the answer is yes, then I think conversations need to be had around that. Some women feel that they should be able to wear makeup regardless of how intelligent they are. Why shouldn't they wear makeup? So I really do think that it comes down to where you are on your comfort continuum at the end of the day.
So we saw in the piece that our three women went from, they took us on a journey from not being so comfortable in their bodies and the way they look to, in the end, saying they love this and this about themselves. And how do we shift and steer towards this kind of positivity as women? How do we overcome these standards?
Well, I think what they've done is really important here, and it's not something that a lot of people are going to do, and that's why I think what the journalists are doing in this department is really important, because you're going into those places which haven't been explored before. You're shining a light on conversations and issues that haven't been brought out into the public domain before, or it's not seen as commonplace. So having uncomfortable conversations, I think, is really, really important. And this is a really, really good place to start. How you might feel about taking that into the workplace when you graduate is a different story. But I think it's something that you need to hold on to.
And just finally, do you think beauty standards are sort of like a trend and they change and shift according to a certain trend of that moment, or is it something that's there like from the get-go and people always try to live up to it?
I think it's there from the get-go, at least in my experience. In television broadcasting, straight hair, big hair, the shoulder pads might have come and gone, but at the same time, just on a lighter note. But there's always an aspiration towards bright makeup, the latest designer clothes. Yeah, I think it pretty much has stayed the same throughout the times.
Right. Thank you very much, Jane.
Pleasure.
Stay tuned, and because after the break we are talking about, guess what? Vaginas.
Welcome back to Refocus. Vagina, vagina, vagina. Me saying that word so casually may shock many of you, and that's the problem. To wrap up today's theme of debunking social norms, we made a short feature about vaginas. It looks into the lived experiences of 3 women who reflect on how their vaginas have empowered them.
My name is Justine Clark.
My name is Rita Potladi.
My name is Paige, and this is my vagina story.
Would you say that you have an earliest memory of you policing your vagina?
I remember as a kid knowing that it was something private, something that not many people should see, and only people that you trust and you know, like your family.
And what would you think, or what do you think are the contributing factors to you policing your vagina?
Well, I don't want to say it's men. I don't want to say it's men because it's men, but it's actually society in general, you know? You become aware of all of these social changes that you just weren't aware of when you were a little kid. And it changes you. It changes the way you think about yourself.
Do you think that men respect the vagina?
I feel like that's impossible. In a world where they're told that they're better than the vagina or stronger than the vagina, it's impossible to see it as an equal. I mean, we have situations in society where women are raped by boyfriends, and just because no force was exerted on it, you know what I mean? They don't feel as if it was rape at all because he thinks that your vagina is mine. Whatever belongs to you is mine because I'm better than you.
And what do you think your vagina means to you?
Well, if I can give you an example rather, it's when I was little, all I had was male cousins. So I had no choice but to play with the boys, and I became a bit of a tomboy. But because I was the only girl, my mother always wanted to put me in a dress. Problem is, it's really, really hard to play in the mud in a dress. It's really hard. And because I just wanted to be a part of everyone else, but my mother wanted me to be a girl, I ended up flashing everyone constantly. It's just hard to play with your cousins in a dress.
If you could use a metaphor to describe your vagina, what would it be and what would it signify about you?
It would probably be a long, dark tunnel, but not a scary one. Just one of those long, dark, cool, chilled ones that you just drive through.
I wouldn't really use a metaphor, but more like a phrase. I think my vagina is 20 feet tall, and that's because I think as women we put in a lot of situations where we are on our knees and we are begging to be respected or we are begging to be noticed. I feel like I've been in situations where I'm begging to be respected, but then you have to actually remind yourself who the hell you are as a woman and get up and realize that you're bigger than this situation.
I think I would describe my vagina as a shadow. And it's a weird thing to say, but it's kind of like I've experienced and I prefer to leave that conversation in the dark. And I've noticed society in general is comfortable with leaving that conversation in the dark like a shadow.
At this stage of your life of womanhood, do you think that you've reclaimed your vagina?
I'm more aware of my vagina. I love my vagina. I talk to my vagina. I touch my vagina. I've just started educating myself more about my vagina, and I educate other people about their vaginas. It's not scary. I think I've just stopped looking at the vagina as something nasty or something ugly, but I've seen it as something beautiful and actually powerful.
In the beginning of the show, we mentioned that we ran a competition where you at home had to tweet us metaphors describing your vaginas. Reporter Phiwokuhle joins us now with the winner.
Thank you so much, Nick and Afika. We are standing outside Revelation's coffee shop where we will be surprising one lucky viewer with double tickets to Kopana Mantra's much anticipated book launch for Period Pains happening at Joburg Market Theatre. So just make sure that you stick around because this is going to be an exciting giveaway. Come with me. Miss Zaza.
Hi.
How are you doing today?
I'm a little shocked because you're Phiwokuhle from REFOCUS.
I sure am, and I bring with me exciting news. You are our competition winner for the Joburg Market Theatre book launch for Kopana Mantra's Period Paints book. How do you feel?
I'm happy. I really never thought that tweeting about my vagina would get me this far. So I'm quite excited.
It's just one of those things you never expect to happen, right? Well, there you are. Let me just reiterate that this is an all expenses paid trip. Your flight has been taken care of, your accommodation, the excursions that you guys are going to have when you get to Johannesburg, all paid for. So all you have to do is just show up and look fly.
Thank you, REFOCUS. Thank you so much.
All right. See, just one of the perks of being a loyal viewer of REFOCUS. Do make sure that you stay tuned in for more exciting competitions. And so now back to you, Nick and Afika in studio.
I've only read some great reviews about that book, and I must say I cannot wait to get my hands on it.
Well, it's only a few more days to the end of the month, so payday's coming up soon. Today, I never thought I would say vaginas so many times in a row in one show. It's quite odd.
I guess your masculinity isn't so fragile after all. Otherwise, it's been a great show. I am Afika Jadezweni.
And I'm Nick Andersen. Thanks for watching. Cheers.